So this first session on day 2 is called the God Pod, and we call it that because it is sponsored by Vision TV, whose mandate you probably know is to reflect the interests of older Canadian viewers in matters spiritual. So today we're going to hear from a dynamic, ultra-contemporary rabbi with his take on universal Jewish values. And then we'll hear from an astronomer and a cosmologist who finds his church in the vault of the sky and in the limitless worlds we find there to the very end of time. And finally, we're going to hear from a man who wonders if some of our gods may have been astronauts. So this is Rabbi Shmuley Boteach. You made it. How are you?
Well, thank you very much.
Bring all the kids?
Well, we have about 400, and there wasn't a place to put them all. But no, some of the kids. Some of the kids. I'm a father of 9.
Saying he's coming, but could he bring some of the kids along? And I knew he had 9, and I said, all of them?
They were at the party last night. Well, ladies and gentlemen, no doubt you heard the story about the man who receives a phone call from his doctor, and the doctor says, sit down, I have bad news and worse news. The man sits down, and the doctor says, test results are in, and you have 24 hours to live. And the man says, what could possibly be worse than that? And the doctor says, I've been trying to call you since yesterday. So I, too, have bad news and worse news. The bad news is that you have to hear me for, it was supposed to be 20, they gave me 16 minutes. The worst news is it's a Jewish 16 minutes. So we're going to be serving dinner 3/4 into the lecture, so please be ready. I have just published a new book called Kosher Lust. This is the 3rd week of its publication, and it's something that we're going to talk about today. I had the honor of serving as a rabbi at Oxford University for 11 years. If you look up marriage in the Oxford Book of Quotations, you will find such optimistic outlooks like Samuel Dryden, who wrote on his wife's tombstone in the 1780s, here lies my wife, here let her lie, now she's at peace, and so am I. Helen Rowland, marriage is whereby a woman exchanges the attention of many men for the inattention of one. But it's really easy to demonstrate the fragmentation of the sexes, and especially the disillusionment of women in modern marriage through a very simple sampling. I'm going to ask a question to the women. It's a precise question. Please raise your hand if you agree with this statement. Raise your hand if you are a woman in this audience who needs a man. Now, before you do, I did not ask you to raise your hand if you can stomach a man, if you can survive a man. Raise your hand if you need a man. Okay, we got a guy raising his hand in the back. That's... Hey, live and let live. God bless you, okay? Any women? The kinda, yeah. What's your name? Jody. So you're prepared to admit that you need a man as if I asked, raise your hand if you have a venereal disease kind of question. Like, women are raising their hands like this. You know, like, where is the security in numbers? I mean, it's a pretty simple question. Okay, so we have 2 women, maybe, 2 halves who need a man. Now, let me do a follow-up question. Raise your hand if you're a woman in this audience who needs a refrigerator. Please raise your hand. Okay. Now, why is it that women will acknowledge a dependency on a piece of metal that can cool their milk rather than a piece of flesh that can electrify their hearts? The answer? Because GE brings good things to life, right? Who has ever heard of a society where women feel degraded through a dependency on men? And the answer, why does this happen? Because we men do not know what women want. It was a question famously put to Sigmund Freud by Marie Bonaparte. in 1938. She said to great niece of Napoleon, she said, "You have fathomed some of the deepest mysteries of the human psyche, but what is it that a woman wants?" And Freud looked at her and said, "I have no idea. I got no clue." And most husbands do the same. They sit there on my couch in counseling sessions, and the wife has mascara streaming down her cheeks, and the husband says, "I have no idea what she wants." She's depressed. She's depressed like her mother. Her mother's also depressed. Today at Idea City 2014, we will make history. I will become the first man in all human history to finally answer that mystery of mysteries, riddle of riddles. What does a woman want? And my friends, a lot of you think a woman wants to be loved. The reason marriages are collapsing is that there's not enough love. But if a woman wanted to be loved, she would never leave the security of her parents' home. Her parents are going to love her unconditionally. When's the last time you heard of Mr. and Mrs. Smith sitting down with Penelope, their daughter, saying, "Penelope, we've brought our attorney, we need to talk about a divorce"? Or when's the last time you heard about Mrs. Smith going to Stacy, the next door neighbor's daughter, middle of the night? "Stacy, you're the girl I really love. I don't like cheating on my daughter, but I feel that you understand me." If our parents will never divorce us or cheat on us, what are we looking for at 15 when we can only be kept at home through coercion, threats, and bribery? And the answer? What a woman wants is the one thing her parents can never give her. A woman wants to be chosen. When your mother tells you you're the prettiest girl in the class, you know that she has a genetic shotgun to her head. But when a man tells you this and he had no compulsion, you believe it. You feel chosen. You are granted the twin virtues of primacy and exclusivity, becoming the one and the only, and you feel special. In other words, what has destroyed marriage in our time, believe it or not, is that we have relied on the soft, comforting, nurturing emotion of love as opposed to the electrifying, magnetic, incendiary emotion of lust. Lust, that desire to be desired, that need to be needed, where we all want to be wanted. Marriages were once built on lust, not on love. You didn't marry because you wanted a partner. What is this, a commercial transaction? Here's my wife, she's my best friend. Really, what do? Watch hockey together? You were once in a relationship because you could not help but gravitate toward that person. And what made it all go wrong, the trivialization of lust and the reason we replaced it with love had a lot to do with the New Testament. St. Paul could not abide the emotion of lust. For everything in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life comes not from the Father, but from the world. Lust is ungodly. Lust is demonic. There was a woman in Texas, a Christian evangelical woman, who, to supplement the family income, started Tupperware-style parties selling sex toys, marital aids, and lingerie for married Christian women in her church. She was quickly arrested on Texas indecency laws, and then her membership of her church was revoked. I was scandalized by the story. Tracked her down, got her on my radio show with a reverend from the United States who's quite famous, who I met on CNN, and his name is the Reverend Flip, and I said, "Flip, what did this woman do wrong? In the Jewish community, we would have given her a medal." He said to me, "Shmuley, you Jews are so carnal. All you Jews think about is sex." I said, "Flip, stop with the compliments. You're not getting better treatment, okay?" He said, "Shmuley, I feel bad for your wife." I said, "Yes, my in-laws say the same thing all the time. I understand. But why do you feel bad for my wife?" He said, "Because you objectify her by lusting after her. You're dehumanizing her. You're supposed to appreciate her deeper qualities. It's about love and not lust." I said, "Flip, there's an implicit commandment in the Bible to lust after your wife." He said, "There's no such commandment. I know the whole Bible." I said, "It's in the 10 Commandments." He said, "I know the 10 Commandments by heart. It's not there." I said, "Flip, what is the 10th commandment?" "Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife," which means by direct implication, you sure as heck ought to be coveting your own. Or it would have said, "Thou shalt not covet any woman." It is a mitzvah, a good deed to lust after your wife. I pity the woman who doesn't feel lusted after. That's why women overwhelmingly are leaving marriages. You know, when we speak about the 50% divorce rate in the Western world, which is unweaving the very fabric of our society, this isn't a male thing. It's a female thing. 75% of those people leaving marriages are women who are tired of being maids or homemakers or even wives. They want their womanhood addressed, and it's not being addressed because love is not enough. Love is not the answer. Lust and desire is. You know, whenever I talk about 50 Shades of Grey, I get, which was plagiarized from my book, by the way, but but I'm an American. I never sue. Whenever I talk about 50 Shades of Grey, I get two responses. The women pretend not to have read it, and the men pretend not to have heard of it. 50 Shades of Grey, is that about fabric? Is it about... Why did women read this book about soft porn with terrible sex scenes? The sex scenes last 2 paragraphs, or so my friends tell me. Because women today don't want Harlequin romance novels. They don't want the chick flicks with the nice, sweet guy, the bumbling fool who marries them at the end. They want raw, carnal passion, desire, lust. And the author tapped into that, and it became a bigger seller than Harry Potter because they're not experiencing it at home. That's why we're seeing so many platonic marriages. Do you know that 1 out of 3 American marriages, 1 out of 3 American marriages is platonic? Even though 2 out of 3 men are on Viagra? That's not an actual statistic, just a little sampling. And 1 out of 3, and even the people who are having sex, does anyone here know what the regularity of sex? I don't know about Canadians. I know Canadians are all like Superman. But for us American men, sex is how often? Once a week for? National average, once a week. It's not bad, 50 times a year. Why do I say that marriage is dying? For 7 minutes at a time, which includes the time he spends begging. So with 5 minutes left to go, I want to give you the 3 secrets of lust. See, we don't build marriages on lust and desire. We build them instead on love, in the belief, A, as I said before, that lust is something degrading and objectifying, and B, that it can't be sustained. It's transient. It's too ephemeral. Here are the 3 rules of lust. I have, right here, the world's #1 object of lust. I just came back from Europe, where people in Eastern Europe, honestly, will give up like their food for 2 months, eating a substandard diet to get one of these. It's called an iPhone, and I do not work for Apple. Steve Jobs was the first marketer to ever understand that lust was an ethereal quality that could be superimposed even on an object. He was the first marketer who didn't want you to love his product the way you loved your car, washing it, taking care of it. He wanted you to lust after it, to stand online in the baking sun the way that Romeo stood outside Juliet's balcony. And he did it through the 3 rules of lust. Rule #1. And they are all counterintuitive, and they all run contrary to love. The lust marriage is totally different to the love marriage. Rule #1. The first thing he did was make his phone impossible to buy. Apple put 300 of these in every store so they would be sold out by 9 o'clock in the morning. If you didn't get there at 3 a.m., you weren't going to get one. For a month, you couldn't buy one. Now, who's ever heard of a company that produces a product that you can't buy? But what Steve Jobs understood is the first rule of lust as opposed to love is unavailability. Plato said you can only lust after that which you don't have. Why do you think all fast food is bad? Every time you think about buying a hamburger, you could just see the chef moments before. Imagine him with a big machete going, here, giddy, 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 giddy. Why does it always taste so bad? It's not the food, it's the fact that you never waited for it. Heinz ketchup, anticipation, it's only tomato sauce. Why does it come out so slow? Because it tastes better if you wait for it. Marriage is the opposite. Marriage is about sex on tap. Are you aware of the fact that for 3,000 years, Jews have imposed a period of sexual abstention even in marriage, so that marriage is not about sex on tap, so that a husband has to lust after his wife and a wife has to lust after her husband? It sounds ridiculous and counterintuitive, and that's only one of the practices that allows couples to feel this unavailability. Who said that marriage is about constant availability? Familiarity breeds contempt. Rule number 2. The second thing that Steve Jobs did with the iPhone and Apple, he became the first marketer to go into hyper-secretive mode where he never released an iota of information about what he was developing. Boeing announces their aircraft, the 787, 12 years before they're released. With Steve Jobs, a guy left one of these, the iPhone 4, if you remember, by accident in a bar. He made a little mistake. He was fired instantly because Steve Jobs was obsessed with secrecy. Because the second rule of lust is mystery. You see, in our culture, we believe that the more open we are, the more we expose our bodies, the more we make ourselves available, the more we talk about every last thing with our spouse, the greater the intimacy. And that's true. You increase love. But love and lust are diametrically opposed. Lust decreases with openness and exposure, and it increases with mystery. Why do you think the Catholic Church has been so successful? For 2,000 years, most successful institution in the history of the world. It's all about these divine mysteries. How could 3 equal 1? Gothic architecture with its deep shadows, the secrets of the confession. Openness and the loss of mystery becomes contemptuous. So when I first arrived at Oxford, 21 years old, and I've never done a wedding, and this couple comes to me and says, we want to get married. You're the only rabbi in town. You're Orthodox. We're not. So we're a little bit avant-garde. I don't want to put the ring on her finger. I want to pierce her navel. I said to him, do whatever you want. You just got to pay. So I said, if you study 6 classes with me on Judaism once a month for the 6 months of your engagement, I'll marry you. We did the kosher food. We did the Jewish festivals. Then we came to the Jewish laws of the bedroom. And I said, in Judaism, to preserve mystery, a wife and a husband don't walk around naked in front of each other. They don't just parade around and they don't take care of their hygienic needs. There's an air of mystery. By the way, a lot of people always say to me, but come on, Shmuley, how do you know about any of this? You Orthodox Jews all have sex through a sheet with a hole in the middle. Who's ever heard that Jews have sex through a sheet and a hole in the middle? Anyone heard that? Ma'am, you've heard that? How big a hole are we talking? I'm also assuming that because men never ask for directions, there's a neon arrow flashing on and off that says insert here. Is that what? Actually, it's not true that Orthodox Jews have sex through a sheet in the hole in the middle. Actually, only Reformed Jews do that. We Orthodox have sex in 2 separate bedrooms through a hole in the wall. And the ultra-Orthodox don full body armor just before to make sure there's no... Actually, none of that is true, but getting back to our story... So I say to the couple, you don't walk around the bedroom naked and exposed. On the contrary, there's a certain magnetism to the body. And here he gets irate and he says, you're bringing all these draconian religious rules that are so antiquated into a modern relationship. You're telling us we should be inhibited even in our marriage. I looked at his fiancée and I said, you can disregard my advice if you wish. But if you do, you face the nightmare scenario. And I had someone play the organ in the background. Da-na-na-na. Not quite as good as his piano performance, but effective nonetheless. And she looks at me and she says, Rabbi Shmuley, what exactly is the nightmare scenario? And I said, the nightmare scenario is where you're married for 4 years. Your husband is in bed watching TV. You come into the bedroom, take off all your clothes, and he continues to watch television. And this nightmare scenario plays itself out in bedrooms across America every night, which led to this interesting recent statistic that 70% of wives undress in the bathroom rather than in front of their husbands because of the insult of him not looking. It's insulting to be naked and you don't even draw a pair of eyeballs because mystery is what leads to lust, which leads us to the third and final rule. Steve Jobs, after making his phone unavailable and insisting on mystery, did one final thing. If you go to a beach, a man sees 1,000 bodies walking around in bikinis. It's sexy, but it's not erotic. How do we know that a beach is not erotic? Because men do 2 things at a beach. They either slip into a deep coma and fall asleep, or they play Frisbee. Now the same man is walking home, and he's passing a woman's bedroom, and she accidentally left the blinds to her bedroom open, and she's walking around in a bra and underwear, same amount of clothing as at a beach, exposing the same amount of flesh. What do you think is going through his mind when he accidentally chances upon that kind of peeping Tom scenario? Does he suddenly think, my gosh, there's a woman walking around in her underwear who forgot to close the blinds? If only I had a Frisbee. Where is the Frisbee? Now, what's the difference between the first scenario where there were 1,000 women dressed like that and this scenario there's only one? The answer? The second scenario, he's seeing something he's not allowed to see. It is sinful, it is forbidden. The third rule of lust is sinfulness. Steve Jobs positioned Apple as the sinful, rebellious upstart against IBM. He launched the Macintosh with the most famous television commercial of all time, where you had this person going up against Big Brother, the 1984 commercial. And what was his slogan throughout all his years, even when Apple became the most valuable company on planet Earth? Think different. Think different. You're the 900-pound gorilla. But still, he positioned himself as the rebellious upstart. Marriage needs sinfulness. You know, we live in this fake culture that believes that men are so much more sexual than women. That the guy turns to his wife and says, how about some sex tonight, honey? And she turns back and says, not tonight, I have a headache. And yet the man can have an axe lodged in his head, and he's still ready. You sure you want to do this, honey? You got an axe in your head. So what? Precisely the opposite is true. Women are much more sexual than men. Women are multi-orgasmic. Men are uni-orgasmic. Female sexual fantasy is so much more elaborate than men's, but we strip women of their sexuality. We extinguish their libidos. The sinful marriage is where the husband is brave enough to give his wife the erotic quiz, asking her what her fantasies are, even about people in their circle, even about friends, because every woman has them and she hides them from her husband. There's no sinfulness. We're afraid of sin. We have sanitized our marriage to the point where there's no danger in them, and that's why lust is dissipating. So I will end with this tiny little story. I'm doing my show, Shalom in the Home, go to a family in upstate New York, and there's a woman who's being so criticized by her husband that she's kind of atrophied, and she's developed OCD. She's becoming a perfectionist to show that she's good enough. Cameras are rolling, and I say to her, you know, I've never met a woman in the world who is ignored by her husband, who's not lusted after, who's not desired, who doesn't develop something of an attraction to another man, who becomes like oxygen to her. Just a little compliment that makes her feel like she's alive. She said, not me, I'm not like that. I'm very devoted to my husband, thought, speech, and action. I said, listen to me. I've got 9 kids back at home. Don't lie to me. I'm not going to waste my time here. I'm here to help you, but if you lie, I can't help. She says, how dare you accuse me of lying? I said, listen, let's get the crew out of here. She says, sit down. You can't make this stuff up. She says, there's a supermarket nearby, and it's a little bit more expensive. And there's a stock boy, get this, with the name Alejandro. And I go there because you know what? He notices when I have my nails done. This woman was reduced to the stock boy who noticed that she had her fingers. You could watch the show. The show aired here in Canada. Then you guys didn't give enough of a damn to keep it on the air. Canadians. Can't live with them, can't get ratings from them. My friends, it is time for kosher lust. It's time for greater desire. It's time for us to believe once again that love is something that could be electrifying, magnetic, and could take us to the mountaintop where we can stay. Thank you very much.
This is a very important book, really, and I urge you all to make your way up to that bookstore and pick it up. And Shmuley, I agree with you, and one of the things that first drew me away from religion was that I noticed that so many of the organized religions put themselves in opposition to pleasure. That there is this strain of religion which says you express it by denial, by self-mortification, by mortifying the flesh, whereas I always thought sex, food, music, it's the gift of God, isn't it?
You'd be amazed how much pleasure you can get from mortifying the flesh and sex, by the way. That was a joke. That was a joke. I totally agree. Gosh, you guys need to take a joke. No, I totally agree. I think that religion is of the other world more than this world. I think Judaism is a profoundly this world-oriented religion. It is about enjoying the pleasures of life, especially sex. Every religion says that sex is about procreation. Interestingly, even evolutionary biology says that. Evolutionary biology says that sex is about the widest possible distribution of our gene pool. The only religion that says that sex is about sewing together two strangers as bone on one bone, flesh of one flesh, is Genesis chapter 2, verse 24, is Judaism. We've had a very healthy sexual ethic, and that's why I've written these books, to spread the message and to feed my 9 children.
So, while I agree with you about all that, I have to take exception with your characterization of Canadians.
Oh.
Do you know why the favorite position in Canada is doggy style?
No, I don't know.
So
And I didn't know that it was doggy style, so...
So that both parties could watch the hockey game.
Thank you very much. I can't compete with that. Okay.